The heavy steel door of the sound studio clicked shut, sealing the world outside with a finality that echoed in Liam Cole's chest. The sudden silence was oppressive. In this room, the walls were lined with acoustic foam wedges, designed to absorb every frequency, every vibration, and every mistake. For years, this space had been his sanctuary, a place where he could control reality by manipulating sound. Now, as he locked the deadbolt, it felt less like a sanctuary and more like a tomb. He dropped his keys into a ceramic bowl on the mixing desk. The clatter was sharp, too loud in the dead air. Liam stood there for a long moment, his eyes adjusting to the low light of the equipment LEDs. Green, red, and amber lights blinked in the darkness, watching him like the eyes of indifferent machines. This was his home now. The lawyer had been clear. The house in Silver Lake, with its mid-century modern lines and the garden he had planted with his own hands, belonged to Serena. The studio, a converted warehouse space in an industrial strip of Burbank, was all that remained of his assets. He walked over to the worn leather couch in the corner, the one he used for short naps during 18-hour mixing sessions. It smelled of old dust and the stale coffee that seemed to permeate the drywall. He sat down, the leather creaking beneath his weight, and stared at the blank screen of his main monitor. His mind, usually a disciplined catalog of sound effects, was a chaotic storm of memories. He could hear the specific timbre of Serena's voice when she told him she was leaving. It was not the shouting match one might expect. It was a cold, flat delivery, devoid of the frequencies of love or regret. She had spoken to him as if reading lines from a script she did not particularly like. Background noise, she had called him. Static. Liam closed his eyes, but the darkness brought no relief. He reached for a bottle of whiskey he kept in the bottom drawer of his desk, pouring a glass with a shaking hand. He drank it neat, the burn trailing down his throat, grounding him in the physical present. He needed to work. Work was the only thing that made sense. If he stopped moving, the crushing weight of his failure would flatten him. He booted up the system. The screens flared to life, illuminating the room in a cool, blue wash. He opened the project file for a romantic comedy he was contractually obligated to finish by Thursday. The scene on the screen showed a couple walking through a park in autumn, laughing, their mouths moving in silent joy. Liam's job was to add the crunch of dry leaves under their boots, the rustle of their coats, the ambient chirp of birds that would make the audience believe in this manufactured happiness. He walked into the Foley pit, a dirt-filled box in the center of the room. He picked up a pair of heavy boots and stared at the screen. The actor on the screen, a handsome man with a jawline like Adrian Steele, leaned in to kiss the woman. Liam dropped the boots. He could not do it. He physically could not make the sound of a fake romance. The very idea of mimicking the sound of footsteps for a man who did not exist felt repulsive. He felt a sudden surge of nausea, a violent rejection of his own craft. Lies, he whispered to the empty room. It is all just lies. He grabbed a handful of unspooled magnetic tape from a nearby shelf and threw it across the room. It unraveled in the air like a dying snake, settling in a tangled heap on the floor. He paced the room, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The silence of the room began to scream at him. He could hear the blood rushing in his ears, a low, thrumming whoosh that sounded like the ocean at night. He was drowning in it. He needed a sound that was real. He needed something that did not pretend to be happy, something that did not apologize for its existence. His eyes landed on the upright piano pushed against the far wall. It was an old Steinway, scarred and out of tune, covered in a thick layer of gray dust. He had bought it years ago at an estate sale, intending to restore it, but like so many things in his life, it had been neglected in favor of Serena's career. He had not touched the keys in 5 years. Liam walked toward it slowly, as if approaching a sleeping animal. He wiped the dust from the bench with his sleeve and sat down. He placed his hands on the keys. His fingers felt stiff, alien. He pressed down on a single key. Middle C. The note rang out, slightly sharp, trembling in the air. It was imperfect. It was lonely. It was perfect. He pressed another key, a minor third below. The interval was dark, melancholic. It resonated with the hollow feeling in his gut. For the first time in weeks, the tightness in his chest loosened, just a fraction. He was not mimicking a footstep. He was not creating the sound of a gun loading or a door closing. He was making a sound that originated from him. He began to play. At first, the melody was hesitant, a series of broken chords that stumbled over one another. He closed his eyes, letting the image of the lawyer's office fade, replacing it with the sound of the notes. He thought of the rain on the window pane. He thought of the way Serena used to look at him before the fame, before Adrian, before he became invisible. He poured that loss into the keys. The music grew in intensity. His left hand hammered out a relentless, rhythmic bass line, a slow, heavy heartbeat that refused to stop. His right hand wove a melody that was sharp and jagged, like broken glass. It was not a polished symphony. It was a conversation with his own ghosts. It was angry. It was desperate. It was the sound of a man screaming without opening his mouth. He did not know how long he played. Minutes stretched into hours. The whiskey remained untouched on the desk. The blue light of the monitors cast long, dancing shadows on the walls as he swayed with the rhythm. He was sweating, his shirt clinging to his back, his hair falling into his eyes, but he did not stop. He felt a strange, terrifying clarity. For years, he had been the listener, the observer, the background. Tonight, he was the source. When he finally stopped, his hands were trembling. The last chord hung in the air, decaying slowly into the absorbent foam of the walls until true silence returned. But this silence was different. It was not empty. It was the silence that follows a storm, charged and electric. Liam turned his head and looked at the computer screen. The red record light was blinking. He had instinctively hit the button before he sat down. He had captured it all. He wheeled his chair back to the mixing desk and saved the file. He stared at the waveform on the screen. It looked violent, a series of sharp peaks and deep valleys. He typed a name for the file, his fingers hovering over the keyboard for a moment before striking the keys. The divorce. He did not listen to it back. He could not bear to hear it yet. He simply exported the file, opened a generic music streaming platform where he had created an anonymous account years ago, and clicked Upload. No genre tags, no description, no artist photo, just the raw audio file sent out into the digital void. Liam stood up, his legs stiff. He walked to the small bathroom attached to the studio and splashed cold water on his face. He looked at himself in the cracked mirror. The man staring back was pale, with dark circles under his eyes and a stubble of beard, but the eyes were different. The dull, defeated glaze was gone. In its place was a cold, hard ember. He walked back out to the main room. Through the high, narrow window near the ceiling, he could see the first gray light of dawn creeping into the sky. The city of Los Angeles was waking up. Adrian Steele was probably waking up in a silk sheet next to Serena. They would drink their green juice and talk about box office projections and red carpet outfits. They would go on pretending they were masters of the universe. Liam lay down on the leather couch, pulling his jacket over him as a blanket. He watched the dust motes dancing in the shaft of morning light. He was homeless. He was divorced. He was broke. But as he closed his eyes, the melody he had written continued to play in his head, looping over and over, louder than the doubt, louder than the pain. He was no longer just a Foley artist. He was no longer just a husband. He was something undefined, something dangerous and raw. And for the first time in a long time, he was not afraid of the silence. He was ready to fill it. Here is the next chapter of the story, written in full, seamless prose with no abbreviations as requested. The morning did not break. It merely seeped into the windowless recording studio like a stain. Liam Cole woke up with a stiff neck and a mouth that tasted of stale whiskey and regret. For a few merciful seconds, his brain did not remember the previous day. He stared at the acoustic foam tiles on the ceiling, their geometric patterns looking like a trap designed to catch sound and never let it go. Then, the memory of the lawyer's office crashed down on him. The signature, the red convertible, the silence of the phone that lay face down on the floor. He sat up on the leather couch, the springs groaning beneath him. The studio was cold. It was a hermetically sealed box, cut off from the warmth of the California sun and the rhythm of the Los Angeles traffic. Here, time did not exist. There was only the hum of the hard drives and the low-frequency vibration of the ventilation system. Liam rubbed his face with his hands, feeling the rough stubble on his chin. He was 32 years old, and he owned nothing but this room and the echoes trapped within it. He stood up and walked to the small kitchenette in the corner to make coffee. The brewing machine hissed and sputtered, a violent sound in the quiet room. Liam leaned against the counter, watching the dark liquid drip into the carafe. He thought of Serena. At this hour, she would be at her Pilates class in West Hollywood, wearing designer activewear that cost more than his monthly rent. She would be glowing, sweating gracefully, preparing to face a world that adored her. She was the picture of motion and vitality. He was just the sediment left behind when the water evaporated. He took his coffee black and walked back to the mixing desk. He had a deadline. The romantic comedy needed its footsteps. He sat in the ergonomic chair, put on his headphones, and tried to work. On the screen, the handsome lead actor was running through an airport to stop the woman he loved from leaving. It was a cliché, a scene Liam had foleyed 100 times before. He picked up a pair of dress shoes and walked into the gravel pit to simulate the sound of running on asphalt. He struck the ground with the shoes. Clack, clack, clack. It sounded wrong. It sounded hollow. He tried again, adjusting his weight, trying to mimic the urgency of love. But all he could hear was the artifice. It sounded like a man hitting a rock with a shoe. It did not sound like heartbreak. It did not sound like desperation. It sounded like a lie. Liam threw the shoes against the wall. They hit the padding with a dull thud. He could not do it. He could not manufacture fake emotion when his own reality was so overwhelming. The ability to compartmentalize, which had been his greatest professional asset, had vanished. The barrier between his work and his life had dissolved. He took off the headphones and let them rest around his neck. His hand hovered over the mouse. He remembered the file he had uploaded the night before. The divorce. In the haze of whiskey and grief, it had felt like a necessary exorcism. Now, in the harsh light of the monitors, it felt like a mistake. Who would want to listen to 4 minutes of a man unraveling on an out-of-tune piano? It was self-indulgent. It was pathetic. He opened the browser, fully intending to delete the track. He wanted to erase the evidence of his vulnerability. He logged into the streaming platform, expecting to see the standard 0 plays notification. He froze. The notification bell icon at the top of the screen was red. It was not just red, it was pulsing with a number that did not make sense. 15,402 plays. 2,300 likes. 450 shares. Liam blinked, certain that the interface was glitching. He refreshed the page. The numbers jumped higher. 16,000 plays. He scrolled down to the comments section. He expected mockery. He expected the internet to be cruel, to laugh at the raw, unpolished quality of the recording. Instead, he found a wall of text that broke his heart all over again. I do not know who this is, but this is exactly how it feels. My husband left me yesterday. I have been listening to this on a loop for 3 hours. There is no technique here, just blood. This pianist is bleeding onto the keys. Does anyone know the artist? The username is just user892. This needs to be in a movie. It sounds like the end of the world. Liam read the comments, his breath catching in his throat. He felt a strange sensation, a mixture of violation and validation. These strangers were not listening to a Foley effect. They were not listening to a simulation. They were listening to him. For the first time in his life, he was not the background noise. He was the signal. He clicked on the Direct Messages tab. There were dozens of inquiries. Most were spam or bots, but one subject line caught his eye. It was simple, written in lowercase letters, devoid of the corporate gloss that usually filled his inbox. Subject: the sound of nothing. Liam clicked it. Dear user 892, my name is Maya Lin. I am a filmmaker. Not the kind you see on billboards on Sunset Boulevard, but the kind who is trying to tell the truth. I am currently editing a film about grief, about the spaces people leave behind when they die. I have been stuck for months. Every composer I hire gives me violins and swelling orchestras. They give me Hollywood sadness. It is too pretty. It is too clean. Then I heard your track. It is ugly. It is jagged. It sounds like a panic attack in slow motion. It is perfect. I do not have a budget that compares to the studios. I cannot offer you fame, but I can offer you a canvas. I want you to score the entire film. I do not want you to change a thing. I want the dust. I want the broken keys. I want the silence. Please respond. I think you are the only person who understands what I am trying to say. Maya. Liam stared at the screen. He knew the name Maya Lin. She was an indie darling, a director known for brutal, uncompromising dramas that won awards at festivals but rarely made money at the box office. She was the antithesis of Adrian Steele. Adrian made movies for teenagers to eat popcorn to. Maya made movies that forced people to sit in their cars and cry before driving home. He looked around his studio. The expensive microphones, the mixing boards, the tools of his trade, they all looked like toys now. He had spent his life helping other people pretend. Serena pretended to be other people. Adrian pretended to be a visionary. Liam pretended to be okay. He typed a reply. His fingers felt heavy, but steady. Maya, I am not a composer. I am a Foley artist. I make fake noises for a living. The track you heard was not a composition. It was a breakdown. He hesitated, his finger hovering over the send button. Was he really going to do this? Was he going to walk away from the safety of the technical world and step into the terrifying realm of the artistic? Serena had called him boring. She had called him static. If he said no, he proved her right. If he stayed in this room making fake footsteps, he was exactly the man she thought he was. He backspaced. He deleted the sentences about being a Foley artist. He deleted the excuse. He typed a single line. Send me the footage. He hit send. Almost immediately, a link appeared in his inbox. Liam clicked it, and a video file began to download. While he waited, he walked over to the piano. He lifted the fallboard and looked at the keys. They were still dusty. The middle C still stuck slightly if you pressed it too softly. It was an imperfect instrument for an imperfect man. He sat down on the bench. He did not play yet. He just listened to the silence of the room. It felt different now. It was no longer empty. It was waiting. On his computer screen, the download bar reached 100%. The film was titled Glass Houses. Liam put his headphones back on. He was not wearing them to hide anymore. He was wearing them to listen. He pressed play. The screen went black, then faded into a grainy, handheld shot of a woman sitting alone at a kitchen table, staring at a cold cup of tea. There was no dialogue. There was no music. Just the raw, ambient sound of a clock ticking on the wall. Liam closed his eyes. He placed his hands on the keys. He did not think about Serena. He did not think about the divorce papers. He thought about the woman on the screen and the vast, terrifying silence that surrounded her. He pressed the first chord. It was low, dissonant, and utterly devastating. The work had begun. For the next 3 months, Liam Cole ceased to exist in the linear world of clocks and calendars. He lived entirely within the magnetic tracks of the digital timeline. The studio in Burbank, once a place of sterile employment, had transformed into a cavern of obsessive creation. He had dragged a mattress into the vocal booth because driving back to his temporary motel felt like a waste of precious momentum. The air in the room was thick with the scent of roasted coffee beans and the metallic tang of heated electronics, a sensory cocoon that separated him from the sun-drenched reality of California outside. He was not merely composing music. He was constructing a sonic landscape that blurred the line between melody and noise. Maya Lin had sent him the rough cut of Glass Houses, and it was a masterpiece of restraint. It was a film about a woman clearing out her father's house after his death, a narrative composed of long, uncomfortable silences and the dusty light of memory. A traditional composer would have filled those silences with swelling violins to dictate how the audience should feel. Liam did the opposite. He stripped the sound away. He spent days recording the sound of his own hand brushing against the rough plaster of the studio wall. He recorded the sound of a violin bow being drawn slowly across the edge of a cymbal, creating a high, shimmering whine that sounded like a nervous system in distress. He layered these textures under the piano melodies, creating a score that felt physical, tactile, and claustrophobic. It was the sound of grief getting stuck in the throat. When he sent the final files to Maya, he felt a sudden, terrifying hollowness. It was the sensation of a parent sending a child off to war. He had poured his own divorce, his own erasure, into every measure. If the world rejected this, they were not just rejecting his work, they were rejecting his pain. Across town, in the vast, air-conditioned hangar of Studio 24, Serena Blake was discovering that having everything she wanted felt remarkably like having nothing at all. She stood on a mark of blue tape in the center of a massive green screen cyclorama. She was dressed in a skin-tight tactical suit that made it difficult to breathe, holding a prop gun that weighed 10 pounds. Cut! The voice boomed over the loudspeakers. Adrian Steele descended from a camera crane like a descending god. He was wearing his signature aviator sunglasses indoors, a pretension that Serena used to find charming but now found exhausting. He walked over to her, stepping over the tangled cables that snaked across the floor. "Serena, baby," Adrian said, placing a hand on her shoulder. His grip was firm, possessive. "You are not giving me the intensity. The alien armada is descending. The world is burning. I need fear. I need you to look at that tennis ball on the stick and believe it is the end of civilization." Serena looked at the tennis ball. It was bright yellow and had a smiley face drawn on it in marker. "I am trying, Adrian. But there is nothing to react to. It is just green walls and noise. Can we run the scene with the other actor? I need something human to connect with." Adrian sighed, a sound of exaggerated patience. "This is a $200 million blockbuster, Serena. We do not have time for method acting exercises. The visual effects team needs the plate. Just give me the face. You know, the face you made in that indie drama 3 years ago. The one that made me hire you." He turned his back on her before she could respond, shouting orders at the lighting director. Serena stood there, surrounded by 100 crew members, yet feeling entirely isolated. She thought of Liam. When she used to practice lines with him in their living room, he would not just read the other parts. He would create the environment. He would dim the lights, play background sounds on his phone, help her find the emotional truth of the scene. He had been her anchor. Adrian was just a mirror, reflecting only what he wanted to see. She walked back to her trailer during the lunch break, her heels clicking on the asphalt. The trailer was luxurious, filled with white orchids and a fridge stocked with expensive champagne, but it felt cold. She sat down at her vanity mirror and pulled out her phone. She needed a distraction from the hollowness in her chest. Her social media feed was usually a curated stream of praise and fashion, but today, something else was trending. A trailer for an independent film called Glass Houses had dropped an hour ago and was already circulating through the industry circles. The buzz was not about the cinematography or the acting, but about the atmosphere. Curious, Serena tapped the video. The screen on her phone went dark. A single, haunting piano note pierced the speaker. It was followed by a sound that made the hair on her arms stand up, a sound like a sharp intake of breath, woven into the melody. The music did not sound like a movie score. It sounded like a memory she had tried to repress. She watched the trailer, mesmerized. The images were stark and beautiful, but the audio was the heartbeat of the piece. It was melancholic, raw, and undeniably familiar. There was a specific cadence to the piano playing, a hesitation before the resolve of the chord that she recognized. It reminded her of rainy Sundays in their old apartment, of a man whose fingers were usually covered in dust, playing soft, sad songs while she drank coffee. But that was impossible. Liam was a technician. He was a man who fixed things other people broke. He was not an artist. He was certainly not capable of this kind of soul-bearing grandeur. She scrolled down to the credits listed in the video description. Director, Maya Lin. Original score by L.C. Serena stared at the initials. L.C. Liam Cole. "No," she whispered to the empty trailer. She laughed, a short, nervous sound. "It is a coincidence. There are a million L.C.s in the world." But she could not stop listening. She played the trailer again and again. The music seemed to mock her current reality. While she was posing in front of green screens, pretending to save a fake world, her ex-husband, the man she had called static, had created something that felt more real than anything she had done in her entire career. A knock on the trailer door startled her. "Serena, we are ready for the explosion setup," a production assistant called out. Serena turned off her phone. She looked at her reflection in the mirror. Her makeup was flawless, masking every pore, every imperfection. She looked like a movie star. She looked like a winner. "I am coming," she said. She stepped out of the trailer and walked back toward the soundstage. But the melody from the trailer did not leave her. It followed her like a ghost, echoing in the spaces between Adrian's shouting and the roar of the pyrotechnics. Back in the studio, Liam watched the view count on the trailer climb. 10,000, 50,000, 100,000. His inbox was flooding with messages from agents, music supervisors, and journalists, all asking the same question: who is L.C.? He deleted them all. He did not want the fame. He did not want the interviews. He wanted the work. He wanted to prove, not to Serena, but to himself, that he was not just an echo of other people's voices. He opened a new project file. Maya had already emailed him about her next idea. She did not want to wait. And for the first time in years, neither did he. The static was gone. The signal was clear. And it was getting louder. The reception was held at a glass mansion perched precariously on the edge of the Hollywood Hills, a structure that looked less like a home and more like a showroom for expensive lives. Below, the sprawling grid of Los Angeles shimmered in the heat haze, a vast ocean of electric lights that promised everything and delivered very little. Serena Blake stood on the terrace, gripping the stem of her champagne flute as if it were a weapon. She was wearing a dress made of liquid silver silk that clung to her body, designed to photograph perfectly from every angle. She looked magnificent. She felt entirely transparent. Inside the house, the noise was deafening. It was not a loud volume of sound, but a dense, suffocating frequency of ego. Producers, agents, and stars mingled in a shark-like frenzy, their conversations a rapid-fire exchange of box office numbers and strategic compliments. Beside her, Adrian Steele was holding court. He was recounting an anecdote from the set of their current blockbuster, his hands gesturing expansively, commanding the attention of a circle of sycophants who laughed on cue. "So I told the stunt coordinator," Adrian boomed, his voice projecting with the practiced resonance of a man who expects to be heard. "If the explosion does not rattle the teeth of the audience in the back row, it is not an explosion. It is a sparkler." The group roared with laughter. Serena forced the corners of her mouth upward. It was a muscle memory now, a reflex she had perfected over the last 3 years. She looked at Adrian. He was handsome, successful, and undeniably powerful. He was the man she had destroyed her marriage to be with. He was the prize. So why did she feel like she was suffocating? "Serena, darling." A woman named Alara, a powerful casting director with eyes like polished obsidian, leaned in. "You look stunning. But I must say, you seem distracted. Is the shoot taking a toll?" "It is intense," Serena replied, her voice smooth and practiced. "Adrian is a perfectionist. He pushes everyone to their limit." "He is a visionary," Alara agreed, nodding. "Although, have you heard the buzz about the competition? The indie circuit is going wild over that little film, Glass Houses." Serena felt a cold spike in her chest. She took a sip of champagne to mask the sudden tremor in her hand. "I saw the trailer. It looks interesting." "Interesting?" Alara laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "My dear, it is devastating. The critics are calling it the first honest film of the decade. And the score? Everyone is hunting for the composer. This L.C. character. He is a ghost. No agent, no website, no publicist. In this town, being invisible is the ultimate power move." "A ghost," Serena repeated softly. "Adrian hates it, of course," Alara whispered conspiratorially, tilting her head toward the director. "He thinks it is sentimental trash. But between you and me, I think he is jealous. That music, it does something to you. It makes you remember things you want to forget." Serena looked away, staring out at the city lights. The description gnawed at her. Things you want to forget. She remembered the nights in the small apartment in Silver Lake, before the stylists and the red carpets. She remembered Liam sitting on the floor, repairing a broken toaster because they could not afford a new one, humming a melody under his breath. It was a simple, quiet life. She had traded it for this glass cage, and now the silence of that old life was coming back to haunt her in the form of a viral symphony. Across the city, in the windowless bunker of the Burbank studio, the atmosphere was the antithesis of the party. There was no champagne, no laughter, and no view. There was only the hum of the servers and the smell of ozone. Liam Cole sat in his ergonomic chair, staring at an email on his screen. It was from the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. Subject: consideration for original score. He had not submitted the work. Maya Lin had done it. She had pushed the film through the festival circuit, and the momentum had become an avalanche. Glass Houses was no longer just a film. It was a cultural moment. And at the center of that moment was the invisible composer who refused to show his face. The door to the studio opened, and Maya walked in. She was a small woman with sharp features and an energy that vibrated with intensity. She carried 2 cardboard cups of coffee and placed one on the desk next to Liam's hand. "You cannot hide in here forever, Liam," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "The nomination announcements are next week. If we get the nod, the press will tear this place apart looking for you." Liam did not look up from the mixing board. He was adjusting the reverb on a cello track for Maya's next project. "Let them look. I am not an actor, Maya. I am not selling a personality. I am selling a sound. If I walk onto a red carpet, the magic dies. They will just see a Foley artist who got lucky. They will see a genius," Maya corrected him. She pulled a chair up and sat beside him. "You are afraid." "I am terrified," Liam admitted, finally turning to face her. His eyes were tired, framed by dark circles, but they held a clarity that had been missing for years. "I know how that world works. I watched it eat my wife alive. It takes everything that is real about you and replaces it with a shiny, marketable shell. I will not let them do that to this music. This music is the only honest thing I have left." Maya studied him for a long moment. "Serena Blake," she said softly. "That is who it was it not? The woman who left you. The inspiration for the track." Liam flinched. He had never spoken her name to Maya. "It does not matter who she was. She is gone." "Is she?" Maya asked. "Because you are writing a symphony of grief, Liam, and the whole world is listening to it. Eventually, she is going to listen to it, too, and she is going to know." "She already knows," Liam said, his voice barely a whisper. "She knows the sound of my silence better than anyone." Back at the party, the night had devolved into a blur of intoxicated indulgence. Adrian was drunk now, his arm draped heavily around Serena's waist. He was loudly critiquing the lighting design of the garden, pointing out flaws that only he could see. "It is amateur," Adrian slurred. "No depth, no drama. Just like that garbage film everyone is talking about. Glass Houses. What kind of title is that? People want to see steel, not glass. They want strength." Serena pulled away from him, a sudden flash of anger cutting through her numbness. "Maybe people are tired of steel, Adrian. Maybe they are tired of explosions. Maybe they want to feel something real for once." The circle of sycophants fell silent. Adrian blinked, his expression shifting from amusement to cold irritation. He looked at Serena as if she were a prop that had malfunctioned. "Real?" he scoffed. "You are an actress, Serena. Your entire life is fake. You pretend to be other people for a living. Do not talk to me about reality. You would not know reality if it hit you in the face." He laughed, expecting the group to join in. A few people chuckled nervously, but most looked away, embarrassed by the cruelty of the statement. Serena stood frozen. The words echoed in her mind, eerily similar to what she had told Liam in the lawyer's office 3 years ago. "You are background noise. You are static." Now, the roles were reversed. She was the one being called fake. She was the one being dismissed. She turned on her heel and walked away. She ignored Adrian calling her name. She walked through the crowded house, out the front door, and past the valet stand. She kept walking until she reached the end of the driveway, where the noise of the party faded into the hum of the crickets in the canyon. She pulled out her phone. Her hands were shaking. She opened the music app and typed in the search bar, "LC." She put the phone to her ear. The piano melody of The Divorce began to play. It was clumsy, raw, and aching with a pain so specific it felt like a fingerprint. She closed her eyes, and suddenly, she was not in a couture dress in the Hollywood Hills. She was back in their old kitchen, watching Liam stir his coffee, the morning light catching the dust motes around him. She remembered the way he used to look at her, not as a star, but as a person. A tear slid down her cheek, hot and stinging. It ruined her perfect makeup, but she did not care. She finally understood what the critics were saying. The music was not just beautiful. It was an accusation. He had become everything she said he could never be, and he had done it by bleeding out the wound she had inflicted. Serena looked up at the moon, high and indifferent above the city of lies. She realized then that she had made a catastrophic mistake. She had chased the sun and burned her wings, while the man she left in the dark had learned to glow. The lights of the press junket were not just bright, they were interrogative. They bore down on Serena Blake, bleaching the color from her vision until all she could see were the black silhouettes of the cameras and the hungry eyes of the journalists. She sat on a high stool in a hotel ballroom in Beverly Hills, her posture rigid, a frozen smile plastered onto her face like a decal. Beside her, Adrian Steele leaned forward, consuming the oxygen in the room with his expansive gestures and booming voice. The chemistry was instantaneous, Adrian was saying, answering a question he had interrupted Serena to answer. When you are making a film of this magnitude, when the stakes are planetary, you need a leading lady who understands the raw, kinetic energy of the scene. Serena is not just an actress. She is a conduit for my vision. Serena nodded mechanically. She had heard this answer 12 times in the last hour. She felt like a ventriloquist's dummy, polished and painted, waiting for the hand on her back to make her move. The journalist, a young woman with a sharp bob and a cynical expression, turned her gaze to Serena. And for you, Serena, how did it feel to transition from the more intimate, character-driven roles of your early career to a massive CGI spectacle? Do you miss the quiet moments? The question hung in the air, sharp and perceptive. Serena opened her mouth to speak, to talk about the hollowness of acting against a green screen, about the exhaustion of screaming at invisible monsters. She evolved. Adrian interjected smoothly, placing a heavy hand on Serena's knee. Evolution is painful, but necessary. Nobody wants to watch people whispering in a kitchen anymore. That is dead cinema. Serena is a star now. Stars belong in the sky, not on the ground. The journalist scribbled something in her notebook, her eyebrow raised slightly. Serena felt a flush of humiliation rise up her neck. It was not the heat of the lights. It was the suffocating weight of being silenced in plain sight. She was the face on the poster, the name above the title, but in Adrian's world, she was merely an expensive prop. Later that evening, the limousine navigated the winding roads of Mulholland Drive in a silence that was heavy with unsaid things. The city of Los Angeles sprawled below them, a glittering grid of ambition and failure. Adrian was scrolling through his phone, his face illuminated by the blue light of the screen. "The tracking numbers are soft," he muttered, his voice tight with suppressed rage. "The marketing team is incompetent. They are focusing too much on the romance angle. They should be pushing the explosions, the scale." "Maybe people are looking for connection, Adrian," Serena said softly, staring out the window at the dark outlines of the cypress trees. "Maybe they are tired of noise." Adrian snapped his head toward her. "Do not start with that artsy nonsense, Serena. We are not making glass houses. We are making a blockbuster. We are not here to make people cry about their dead fathers. We are here to sell tickets." The mention of glass houses hit Serena like a physical blow. The film had opened in limited release 2 days ago, and the critical reception had been rapturous. But it was the score, the haunting, minimal score by the mysterious L.C., that was dominating the cultural conversation. "Have you listened to it?" Serena asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. "Listen to what?" "The score. For glass houses." Adrian scoffed, throwing his phone onto the leather seat. "I do not listen to depression, Serena. It is 4 chords and a lot of reverb. It is a trick. It is manipulative. The guy, whoever he is, is probably some basement dweller who does not know a symphony from a synthesizer. Serena turned away, biting her lip. She knew he was wrong. She knew because every time she heard a snippet of that music on the radio or in a passing car, her heart contracted. It was not a trick. It was a diary. Meanwhile, in the industrial silence of the Burbank studio, the basement dweller was standing in the center of the room, holding a letter that felt heavier than lead. Liam Cole read the words again. The Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences is pleased to inform you. Maya Lin sat on the couch, a bottle of cheap champagne open on the table. She was beaming, her eyes crinkling with genuine joy. You did it, Liam. A Golden Globe nomination. And the Oscar buzz is real. You are going to have to buy a tuxedo. Liam lowered the letter. He did not feel triumphant. He felt exposed. For 3 years, he had worn his anonymity like a suit of armor. He had hidden behind the mixing console, behind the Foley pits, behind the silence. Now, the spotlight was swinging toward him, and he was terrified of what it would reveal. I cannot go, Maya, Liam said, his voice raspy. I cannot walk that red carpet. I cannot stand up there and give a speech. Why not? Maya asked, her smile fading. Because of her? Liam walked over to the piano, the dusty, out-of-tune upright that had started it all. He ran his hand along the chipped wood. Because this music was not written for them. It was not written for the Academy or the critics. It was written because I was bleeding to death, Maya. If I turn it into a trophy, if I polish it up and smile for the cameras, then it becomes just another product. It becomes exactly what she said I was. Fake. Maya stood up and walked over to him. She placed a hand on his arm. Liam, listen to me. The world is full of noise. Most of it is meaningless. You created a signal. You created something true. If you do not claim it, someone else will try to define it. Do not let Serena or Adrian or anyone else define your voice anymore. You own the sound. Liam looked at her. He saw the fierce belief in her eyes, a belief that he had never seen in Serena's gaze. Serena had loved him for what he could do for her. Maya respected him for who he was. I will go, Liam said quietly. But I go as myself. No publicist. No makeover. No lies. The following morning, Serena sat in the breakfast nook of the glass mansion, nursing a cup of herbal tea. Adrian had already left for the studio, leaving behind a chaotic trail of espresso cups and discarded script pages. The house was silent, but it was a cold, sterile silence, devoid of the warmth that Liam used to bring to a room. She opened her tablet to read the trade news. The headline screamed at her in bold black letters. Mysterious composer L.C. T.O. attend awards season. Reveal imminent. Her pulse quickened. She clicked on the article. It featured an interview with Maya Lin. Serena scanned the text, her eyes darting frantically until she found the paragraph that made her blood run cold. Interviewer. The score uses very unusual textures. It almost sounds like life. Maya Lin. That is because the composer is not traditionally trained in orchestration. He comes from a background in Foley art. He understands the emotional weight of a footstep or the sound of a door closing forever. He built the music out of the sounds of a home falling apart. Serena dropped the tablet. It clattered onto the marble table, the sound echoing through the empty cavern of the kitchen. Foley. The confirmation hit her with the force of a physical impact. There was no doubt left. The genius everyone was worshipping. The man who had captured the heart of the industry with his raw, unvarnished emotion was the husband she had discarded. She had mocked him for his little sounds. She had told him he was small, and he had taken those small sounds and built a monument that towered over her blockbuster career. She stood up, her legs trembling. She walked to the window and looked out at the smog-choked horizon. She remembered the way Liam used to look at her when she practiced her lines, with patience, with adoration, with a quiet depth she had mistaken for dullness. She had traded a man who could turn the sound of a breaking heart into a symphony for a man who thought explosions were a substitute for emotion. For the first time in years, Serena Blake did not feel like a star. She felt like a fraud. And the terrifying realization settled in her gut. When Liam finally stepped onto that stage, he would not be looking for her approval. He would not be looking at her at all. She would just be another face in the crowd, another source of background noise. She picked up her phone. Her thumb hovered over his old number. She had not deleted it. But as she stared at the digits, she realized she had nothing to say. There were no words in her script that could fix this. She lowered the phone and let the silence of the big, empty house swallow her whole. The morning of the Academy Award nominations arrived with the peculiar, suffocating stillness that descends upon Los Angeles when thousands of egos are collectively holding their breath. In the master bedroom of the glass mansion, the air was cold, conditioned to a precise 68 degrees, preserving the occupants like orchids in a florist's refrigerator. Serena Blake sat on the edge of the California king bed, wrapped in a silk robe that felt less like luxury and more like a shroud. On the wall-mounted television, the morning news anchors beamed with aggressive cheerfulness, preparing to read the list of names that would determine the social hierarchy of Hollywood for the next year. Adrian Steele paced the room. He was wearing a cashmere sweater and holding a tumbler of kale juice that he had not taken a sip of in 20 minutes. He looked like a caged tiger, his energy frantic and dangerous. "They have to acknowledge the scale," Adrian muttered, speaking more to the room than to Serena. "You do not build a $200 million universe and get ignored. The Academy is old-fashioned, but they are not blind. They need the ratings." Serena said nothing. Her hands were folded in her lap, her fingers interlaced so tightly the knuckles were white. She was not praying for Adrian's nomination. She was praying for silence. But inside her head, the melody of glass houses was playing on an infinite loop, a haunting refrain that seemed to grow louder with every beat of her heart. Since realizing the truth about the composer L.C., that the initials stood for Liam Cole, the man she had discarded as static, she had been living in a state of suspended panic. And now, the anchor announced, her voice pitching up an octave, for the category of Best Original Score. Adrian stopped pacing. He turned to the screen, his jaw set in a hard line. His film, Titan's Fall, had a score composed by an industry veteran, a bombastic orchestral wall of sound designed to manipulate the pulse. He expected to hear it. "The nominees are," the anchor read. Serena closed her eyes. "Hans Zimmer for Dune, Part 2. Ludwig Göransson for Oppenheimer." The names rolled past, titans of the industry. And then, the pause. The anchor smiled, a look of genuine intrigue crossing her face. "And a surprise newcomer who has taken the festival circuit by storm. 4 glass houses. The nominee is L.C." The silence in the bedroom was absolute. It was shattered a second later by the sound of glass breaking. Adrian had hurled his tumbler against the far wall. The green juice splattered across the white minimalist art, a violent abstract stain. "A&E film?" Adrian screamed, his face flushing a deep, ugly red. "A movie about a woman crying in a kitchen gets a score nomination over Titan? It is a joke. It is political. They are trying to be edgy." Serena did not flinch at the noise. She stared at the television screen, where a generic graphic of the Glass Houses poster was displayed because there was no headshot of the composer. She felt a strange, cold clarity wash over her. It was not a joke. It was justice. "It is not political, Adrian," Serena said, her voice quiet but cutting through his rage. "It is beautiful. The music. It makes you feel something." Adrian spun around, his eyes wild. "Whose side are you on? You are the star of Titan, Serena. If I fail, you fail. Do you think anyone is going to remember your green screen weeping if the movie bombs with the critics? You are tied to me." "I know," Serena whispered. "I am tied to you." The realization hit her with the weight of a stone. She was tethered to a sinking ship of arrogance, while the man she had called boring was soaring on the wings of his own authenticity. She stood up and walked into the bathroom, locking the door behind her. She turned on the faucet, letting the water run to drown out Adrian's shouting. She looked in the mirror. The woman staring back was beautiful, polished, and utterly empty. She was the best actress in the world, because she had fooled everyone into thinking she was happy. Miles away, in the dim sanctuary of the Burbank studio, the reaction to the nomination was starkly different. There was no shouting. There was no broken glass. There was only the soft hum of the equipment and the sound of Maya Lin exhaling a breath she seemed to have been holding for months. "You are an Academy Award nominee, Liam," Maya said softly. Liam Cole sat in his chair, staring at the live stream on his monitor. He felt a profound sense of dislocation. The name LC felt like a shield he had crafted, and now the world was trying to pry it away. "It does not feel real," Liam said. He looked down at his hands, the same hands that used to wash dishes in a cramped apartment, the same hands that Serena had pushed away when he tried to comfort her. "I am just a guy who records sound effects, Maya. I am the guy who makes the sound of bones breaking with celery stalks." "Not anymore," Maya said, walking over to the window and pulling back the heavy blackout curtain. A thin sliver of sunlight sliced into the room, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. "You have to go, Liam. You cannot send a proxy. You cannot hide behind the initials anymore. You have to walk that red carpet." Liam stood up and walked to the piano. He played a single chord, a C minor seventh, unresolved, hanging in the air like a question. "If I go," he said slowly, "I have to see her. She will be there." Titan got the visual effects nod. "She will be presenting." "Is that why you are afraid?" Maya asked. "Are you afraid she will hurt you again?" Liam shook his head. "No, I am afraid that when I look at her, I will not feel anything at all. And that scares me more than the pain." The days leading up to the ceremony passed in a blur of surreal preparation. Maya hired a stylist, a friend from her film school days who understood that Liam was not a mannequin to be dressed, but an artist to be presented. They chose a tuxedo that was classic, sharp, and black, no sequins, no velvet, just stark simplicity. When Liam tried it on in the small dressing room of a boutique on Melrose Avenue, he looked in the mirror and did not recognize himself. The slouch of the defeated husband was gone. His shoulders were back. His eyes, once dull with the fatigue of trying to please someone who could not be pleased, were clear and focused. He looked like a man who carried a secret that the whole world wanted to know. On the other side of the city, Serena was undergoing her own transformation, but hers felt like an armoring. Her team of stylists, makeup artists, and publicists descended upon the mansion like a flock of birds. They pulled her hair back tight, scraping it away from her face to highlight her cheekbones. They painted her lips a deep, blood red. They zipped her into a gown that was structured like a corset, rigid and unforgiving. "You look fierce," her publicist said, nodding in approval. "Like a warrior queen. That is the narrative tonight. Strong, unbothered. The power couple." Serena looked at her reflection. She did not look like a queen. She looked like a weapon that Adrian was planning to brandish to distract from his lack of a nomination. The limousine ride to the Dolby Theater was a silent funeral procession. Adrian was scrolling through Twitter, obsessing over the betting odds for the awards. Serena looked out the tinted window at the palm trees silhouetted against the twilight sky. "Adrian," she said, breaking the silence. "Do you ever think about why we are doing this? Not the movies, the fame, the noise. Why do we need it so badly?" Adrian did not look up. "Because the alternative is being nobody, Serena. And nobody matters." The car slowed as they approached the security checkpoint. The barricades were lined with thousands of fans screaming, flashing cameras, and waving signs. It was a wall of sound, a cacophony of adoration. "Showtime," Adrian said, putting on his sunglasses even though it was night. He grabbed her hand, his grip tight and performative. Serena took a deep breath. She stepped out of the car and onto the red carpet. The flashbulbs exploded like lightning storms. The roar of the crowd was deafening. She smiled, waved, and turned her body to catch the light, just as she had been trained. But then, the rhythm of the carpet changed. A hush rippled through the press line, starting at the far end and moving toward her like a wave. Photographers stopped shouting her name and turned their lenses toward the entrance. A black sedan had pulled up. The door opened, and a man stepped out. He was alone. He walked with a quiet, deliberate grace that contrasted sharply with the frantic energy of the stars around him. He was not smiling for the cameras. He was simply observing them. Serena froze. Adrian tugged at her arm, annoyed. "What are you doing? Keep moving." But she could not move. She watched as the man turned his head. The lights caught his face. It was a face she had woken up next to for 7 years. It was a face she had ridiculed for being too plain. But tonight, under the glare of the Hollywood lights, he looked devastating. It was Liam. He did not look like a Foley artist. He looked like a maestro. He began to walk down the carpet, and for the first time in the history of the Academy Awards, the screaming stopped. The reporters were too busy whispering. Is that him? Is that L.C.? Liam walked past the interviewers who were thrusting microphones in his face. He nodded politely, but did not stop. He was moving toward the entrance, his path destined to cross hers. Serena felt her heart hammer against her ribs. She wanted to run. She wanted to scream. She wanted to fall to her knees and beg for forgiveness. But she was trapped in her corset, trapped in her role, trapped in the persona of the unbothered superstar. Liam drew closer. He was 10 feet away. 5 feet. He looked up. His eyes met hers. The world fell away. The noise of the crowd, the shouting of the photographers, the pressure of Adrian's hand, it all dissolved into static. There was only the frequency of his gaze. She expected anger. She expected hatred. She would have welcomed hatred, because hatred implies passion. But in his eyes, she saw something far worse. She saw peace. He looked at her not as a wife who had betrayed him, or a star who had outshone him, but as a stranger he once knew. A familiar face in a crowd of strangers. He did not stop. He did not speak. He simply held her gaze for 1 second, 1 eternity, and then he walked past her, disappearing into the golden light of the theater lobby. Who was that? Adrian asked, looking back with a frown. He looks familiar. Serena let out a breath that shuddered through her entire body. That, she whispered, the word tasting like ash in her mouth, was the sound of everything I lost. The Dolby Theater was a cavern of manufactured starlight. 3,000 of the most influential people in the entertainment industry sat in rows of plush red velvet, breathing in air that smelled of expensive perfume, hairspray, and anxiety. The silence inside the auditorium was different from the silence in Liam Cole's studio. In Burbank, silence was a canvas waiting to be filled. Here, silence was a weapon, a pause between judgments. Serena Blake sat in the front row, a position of honor reserved for the nominees of the major categories. To her left sat Adrian Steele, who was currently checking his reflection in the dark screen of his phone, adjusting his tie with a microscopic twitch of his wrist. To her right sat an A-list actress who had already won 2 Oscars and was currently pretending to be interested in the set design. Serena felt like an imposter in her own life. The corset of her gown dug into her ribs, a constant physical reminder of the role she was playing. The supportive partner, the glamorous star, the happy woman. And now, the announcer's voice boomed, reverberating through the massive speaker system. To perform the nominated original score from the film Glass Houses, please welcome the composer, L.C. The lights in the auditorium dimmed until the audience was plunged into darkness. A single spotlight cut through the black void, illuminating a grand piano sitting alone at center stage. It was a stark contrast to the previous performance, which had featured 60 dancers and pyrotechnics. There was just the wood, the keys, and the man walking out from the wings. Liam Cole moved with a slow, deliberate gait. He was not wearing the wireless headset microphone that pop stars wore. He was not waving to the crowd. He walked to the piano bench and sat down, adjusting the height with a simple twist of the knob. He took a moment to wipe his hands on his trousers, a nervous tic that Serena recognized instantly. It was the same thing he used to do before fixing a leaking sink or soldering a broken wire. Serena stopped breathing. Her heart hammered against the walls of her chest, a frantic rhythm that threatened to drown out the room. She glanced at Adrian. He was suppressing a yawn, his eyes glazed over with boredom. He did not see the man on stage. He only saw a delay in the schedule. Liam placed his hands on the keys. He did not look at the audience. He did not look at the cameras. He looked down, as if he were reading a text written in the grain of the ivory. Then he played. The first note was soft, a high, fragile pitch that hung in the air like a question. It was followed by a low, rumbling chord in the left hand, the sound of thunder rolling in the distance. The melody began to unfold, and for Serena, it was not music. It was a memory. She recognized the cadence. It was the rhythm of their arguments. It was the staccato silence of their dinners when they had nothing left to say. It was the slow, dragging tempo of the days after she had told him she wanted a divorce. Liam was not playing a song for a movie character. He was playing the autopsy of their marriage. The orchestra behind him remained silent. The conductor stood with his baton lowered, his head bowed. This was a solo performance in the truest sense of the word. It was one man telling his side of the story in a language that required no translation. As the music built to a crescendo, the camera crane swooped down, projecting a close-up of Liam's face onto the massive screens flanking the stage. His eyes were closed. There was no anger in his expression, only a profound, exhausting sorrow. He looked beautiful. He looked broken. He looked real. Serena felt a tear slip out from the corner of her eye. She tried to catch it, to maintain the facade of the warrior queen her publicist had constructed, but her hand was trembling too much. She looked around the room. The jaded producers, the cynical agents, the stars who had seen everything, they were all leaning forward. The theater was so quiet that she could hear the creak of the piano pedal. "He is good," Adrian whispered, leaning close to her ear. "But it is too small. It needs strings. It needs drama." Serena turned to him, her movement sharp and sudden. "It is not small, Adrian," she hissed, her voice shaking. "It is the biggest thing in this room." Adrian recoiled, surprised by the venom in her tone. He looked at her, then back at the stage, confused. He did not understand. He could not hear the lyrics in the piano notes because he had never taken the time to learn the language of pain. On stage, Liam reached the final passage of the piece. It was a series of descending chords, getting softer and softer, mimicking the sound of footsteps walking away, fading into the distance until they were gone. He held the final chord, letting the sound decay naturally until absolute silence reclaimed the room. He lifted his hands from the keys. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Then, the applause began. It did not start as a polite ripple. It erupted like a dam breaking. People rose to their feet, not out of obligation, but out of a visceral need to respond to what they had just witnessed. It was a standing ovation that felt like a release. Liam stood up. He looked out at the sea of clapping hands. He blinked, the spotlight blinding him. He gave a small, awkward bow, not the deep, theatrical bow of a maestro, but the nod of a workman who had finished a job. He turned and walked off the stage, disappearing back into the shadows before the applause had even reached its peak. "Well," the host said, walking back onto the stage, looking visibly moved. "I think we all need a moment after that." The ceremony continued, but the energy in the room had shifted. The subsequent awards for sound editing and costume design felt trivial. The audience was still vibrating with the frequency of Liam's performance. 30 minutes later, the category for Best Original Score was announced. The presenter, a legendary composer with white hair, opened the envelope with trembling hands. "The Oscar goes to," he said, pausing for effect, though everyone in the room already knew the answer. "L.C. for Glass Houses." The roar was deafening. Maya Lin jumped up from her seat in the third row, hugging Liam fiercely. Serena watched from the front row as Liam stood up. He buttoned his jacket. He looked terrified. He walked to the stage, not with the swagger of a winner, but with the reluctance of a man walking to the gallows. He took the golden statue from the presenter. He looked at it for a long moment, the lights reflecting off its polished surface. He stepped up to the microphone. The room fell silent again, hungry for his voice. "I did not write this music to win an award," Liam said. His voice was deep, raspy, and entirely unpolished. "I wrote it because I had to. I wrote it because silence is heavy, and sometimes you have to break it before it breaks you." He paused, his eyes scanning the front row. He found her. He found Serena. The lights were bright, but he saw the shimmer of her silver dress. He saw the way she was looking at him, with pride, with regret, with a longing that was 3 years too late. "Thank you to Maya for listening," Liam continued, tearing his eyes away from Serena. "And thank you to the silence. It was a harsh teacher, but it taught me everything I know. He lifted the statue slightly, turned, and walked away. The camera cut to Serena. She was clapping, her hands moving mechanically. But her face was a mask of tragedy. Beside her, Adrian was already checking the betting odds for the next category, oblivious to the fact that the woman next to him had just watched her heart being accepted by another man on national television. He did not even thank his agent, Adrian muttered. Amateur. Serena closed her eyes. The applause washed over her, a tide of noise that could not drown out the single, devastating truth that was ringing in her ears. Liam had not just won an Oscar. He had won the breakup. He had turned his suffering into gold, while she was still holding on to a handful of glitter. She needed to get out. She needed air. She needed to escape the suffocating proximity of Adrian's ego. I am going to the restroom, Serena whispered, standing up before the commercial break was even over. Now, Adrian asked, annoyed. They are about to announce Best Director. I need you here for the reaction shot. I do not care about your reaction shot, Adrian, Serena said, her voice loud enough for the people in the row behind them to hear. She squeezed past his knees, ignoring his shocked expression, and ran up the aisle. She pushed through the heavy doors of the auditorium and into the lobby. It was empty, save for a few security guards and seat fillers. She walked toward the bar, her breath coming in short gasps. She turned a corner and stopped dead. Standing near the exit doors, holding the golden statue loosely in one hand and loosening his tie with the other, was Liam. He was alone. He looked up as he heard the rustle of her dress. They were 10 feet apart. The red carpet outside was chaos. The auditorium inside was a pressure cooker, but here, in the liminal space of the lobby, it was just the two of them. The static was gone. The signal was clear. Hello, Serena, Liam said. His voice was calm, devoid of the bitterness she deserved. Liam, she breathed, the name feeling foreign and familiar all at once. She took a step toward him. You were incredible. I was honest, he corrected her gently. There is a difference. The lobby of the Dolby Theater was a suspended reality, a vacuum of plush carpeting and Art Deco lighting that existed between the frenetic violence of the red carpet and the stifling pressure of the auditorium. Here, the roar of the applause was just a muffled vibration in the floorboards, a distant thunder that threatened a storm but delivered only echoes. Liam Cole stood near the heavy brass doors of the exit, the golden statue dangling from his hand as if it were a forgotten drink. He was looking at Serena Blake, but his gaze did not hold the weight of judgment. It held the terrifying lightness of a man who no longer needed to be seen by her. Serena took another step toward him. The heels of her silver shoes sank into the carpet, making her feel unmoored, as if the ground beneath her were soft and treacherous. She searched his face for a map of their past, for the furrowed brow of the husband who used to worry about the electric bill, for the soft eyes of the man who used to make her tea when she was sick. She found none of it. The man standing before her was sharpened by a grief she had inflicted. He was a stranger wearing her husband's face. I did not think you would come, Serena said. Her voice was thin, stripped of the vocal training and the projected confidence that had won her millions of fans. I thought you would send Maya. Maya wanted me to hide, Liam replied. He shifted his weight, the tuxedo jacket pulling slightly across his shoulders. She thought I was not ready to face the noise. But I realized that hiding is what the old Liam would have done, and he does not live here anymore. The use of the third person to describe his former self struck Serena like a physical blow. It was a verbal severance, a confirmation that the man she had divorced was truly dead. She reached out a hand, her fingers trembling in the air between them, hovering inches from the sleeve of his jacket. She wanted to touch him, to ground herself, to prove that he was real and not just a projection of her guilt. Liam, she whispered, her hand dropping to her side as he did not move to meet it. The music, I heard it. I really heard it. It was about us. It was about the apartment in Silver Lake. It was about the day I left. It was about the silence you left behind, Liam corrected her. His voice was level, devoid of the accusation she was desperate to hear. If he screamed at her, if he threw the statue at the wall, it would mean he still cared. It would mean there was still passion, however twisted. But this calm was a flat line. It was about learning to live in a house that suddenly had no echo. "I am sorry," Serena blurted out. The words felt inadequate, small and pathetic against the enormity of what had happened. "I know that sounds meaningless now. I know I hurt you. But you have to understand. I was suffocating. I thought I needed more. I thought I needed the world." She gestured vaguely toward the auditorium doors, behind which the world's elite were currently celebrating their own importance. "And now you have it," Liam said. He looked at her silver dress, the diamonds around her neck, the perfect, frozen architecture of her hair. "You have the world, Serena. You are on every billboard in Los Angeles. You are the face of a franchise. You won." "I did not win," she said, her voice cracking. Tears threatened to spill over, risking the ruin of her makeup. But she was past the point of vanity. "Look at me, Liam. I am standing in a $2,000 dress next to a man who does not know my middle name. I am surrounded by people who love me, and I have never been more lonely in my life. Adrian. He is loud. Everything about him is loud. But there is no signal. It is just noise." She took a breath, a jagged intake of air. "You were the signal. I was too deaf to hear it. I called you static because I did not understand that static is the only thing that is real. It is the sound of the universe breathing." Liam looked at her for a long moment. A flicker of something passed through his eyes, not pity, but a distant, melancholic recognition. He remembered the woman she used to be. He remembered the struggling actress who would cry on his shoulder after a failed audition, the woman who had once told him that his heartbeat was her favorite sound. He mourned her, but he mourned her as one mourns a character in a book that has already been finished. "You cannot rewrite the track, Serena," he said softly. "Once it is recorded, it is permanent. You can remix it, you can layer over it, but the original waveform is always there. We are done. The song is finished." "No," Serena pleaded, stepping closer, invading his personal space. The scent of her perfume, jasmine and sandalwood, wafted toward him, a sensory trigger that 3 years ago would have brought him to his knees. Now, it just smelled like a duty-free shop. "It does not have to be finished. We can talk. Get coffee. Just you and me. No agents. No Adrian. Just Liam and Serena." Liam sighed, a sound of bone-deep exhaustion. He finally looked at his watch. It was a cheap digital watch, a stark contrast to the Rolexes and Pateks worn by the men inside. "I cannot do that, Serena." "Why not?" she demanded, a flash of her old entitlement sparking in her eyes. "Because you are famous now? Because you are too good for me?" "Because I am happy," he said. The 3 words hung in the air, more devastating than any insult. Serena recoiled as if he had slapped her. Happiness was the one thing she could not buy, the one award she could not win. "You are happy," she repeated, her voice a whisper. "I am content," Liam amended. "I wake up in the morning, and I do not feel like I am auditioning for my own life. I make my coffee. I go to the studio. I listen to the world. It is quiet. It is peaceful, and I will not let anyone bring the noise back into it. Not even you." He tightened his grip on the Oscar. "Especially not you." The heavy double doors of the auditorium burst open. A wave of applause and orchestral music spilled into the lobby. A group of seat fillers and production assistants scurried out, followed by a camera crew that was repositioning for the next segment. The bubble of their privacy popped. The world was rushing back in. "Liam," a voice called out from the entrance. Maya Lin stood there. She was wearing a simple black suit, her hair messy, her face glowing with adrenaline. She did not look like she belonged in this palace of vanity, and that made her the most beautiful thing in the room to Liam. "The car is here," Maya said, breathless. "We can go. We can skip the governor's ball. We can go get tacos." Liam smiled. It was a genuine smile, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners. It was a smile Serena had not seen in years, and it was not directed at her. "Tacos sound perfect," Liam said. He turned back to Serena. He did not say goodbye. He simply nodded, a final punctuation mark on a sentence that had run on for too long. He turned his back on her and walked toward Maya. The two of them walked out of the glass doors and into the cool California night, leaving the gold statue, the red carpet, and the woman in the silver dress behind them. Serena stood frozen in the lobby. The air conditioning felt suddenly arctic against her skin. Serena. The voice was grating, booming, familiar. Adrian Steele marched out of the auditorium, his face flushed with irritation. "Where have you been?" he demanded, grabbing her elbow with a proprietary roughness. "They just announced Best Director. I did not win, and you were not there to comfort me. The camera was on our empty seats for 5 seconds. Do you have any idea how bad that looks?" Serena looked at Adrian. She looked at his perfectly capped teeth, his expensive tan, his eyes that saw only reflections of himself. She looked at the hand gripping her arm. "It looks bad," Adrian repeated, shaking her slightly. "We have to go to the press room. We have to spin this. We have to look like a united front." Serena looked at the exit doors where Liam had vanished. The silence he had left behind was fading, replaced by the frantic pulse of Adrian's ego. She felt a scream building in her throat, a dissonance that was tearing her apart from the inside. "Serena, are you listening to me?" Adrian snapped. "I am talking to you." "I hear you, Adrian," Serena said, her voice dead and flat. "I hear you perfectly." She pulled her arm from his grasp. It was a small movement, but it required every ounce of strength she had left. "But I am not listening anymore." She walked past him, not toward the exit, but toward the ladies' room. She needed to look in the mirror. She needed to see if there was anything left of Serena Blake beneath the silver and the paint, or if she had truly become just a ghost in a machine she could no longer control. As she pushed the door open, the faint sound of a piano melody seemed to follow her, echoing in the marble hallway, a reminder of the signal she had lost forever. The fluorescent lights of the all-night diner on Sunset Boulevard hummed with a low, insect-like buzz that Liam Cole found infinitely more soothing than the orchestral swells of the Dolby Theater. He sat in a red vinyl booth that had been patched with duct tape, a half-eaten plate of carne asada tacos in front of him. The Golden Academy Award stood on the Formica table, wedged incongruously between a plastic bottle of ketchup and a sticky dispenser of napkins. It looked less like a holy grail of artistic achievement and more like a strange, shiny paperweight that had been left behind by a careless patron. Across from him, Maya Lin was wiping salsa from her chin with the back of her hand, laughing at something he had said about the tuxedo being a straitjacket in disguise. She had kicked off her heels under the table, and her posture was relaxed, slumped in that comfortable, exhaustion-fueled way that only close friends share after a long battle. "You know," Maya said, gesturing to the statue with a French fry, "you cannot just leave him there next to the condiments. He is a knight. He deserves some respect." "He is a doorstop," Liam replied, though his voice lacked any real bite. He took a sip of his lukewarm cola. "He is a symbol, Maya, and symbols are heavy. Right now, this taco is the only thing that feels real." Maya smiled, her eyes softening. She reached across the table and placed her hand over his. Her skin was warm, rough from days spent handling film reels and camera equipment. It was a worker's hand, honest and grounding. "You did good tonight, Liam. And I do not mean the speech. I mean the lobby. I saw her face. You did not break." Liam looked down at the dark liquid in his glass. "I did not break because there was nothing left to shatter. It was strange, Maya. Looking at her was like looking at a photograph of a house I used to live in. I remember the layout. I remember where the light hit the floor in the afternoon. But I do not have the keys anymore, and I do not want to go back inside." "Good," Maya whispered, squeezing his hand. "Because you have built a new house. And this one has windows." Miles away, in the manicured garden of the Sunset Tower Hotel, the Vanity Fair after-party was raging like a forest fire of vanity. The air was thick with the smoke of expensive cigars, and the cloying scent of desperation masked as celebration. Serena Blake stood near the edge of the infinity pool, shivering despite the heat of the patio heaters. The silver dress that had felt like armor earlier in the night now felt like a cage of wire and silk, cutting into her skin with every breath. Adrian Steele was holding court at a nearby cabana, surrounded by a group of young, aspiring actresses who were hanging on his every word as if he were a prophet. He was recounting the story of his loss, spinning it into a narrative of martyrdom. The Academy is afraid of bold visions, Adrian was saying, his voice slurring slightly from the fourth scotch he had consumed. They reward the small. They reward the safe. That little piano plinking? It is elevator music for people who are afraid to feel the earth shake. The girls giggled, a chorus of sycophants terrified of breaking the spell. Serena watched him, a wave of nausea rolling through her gut. She saw the way his eyes roamed over their bodies, assessing them not as people, but as potential assets, just as he had once assessed her. She realized with a sudden, terrifying clarity that she was not his partner. She was merely the current hood ornament on the vehicle of his ego, and she was aging out of the role. Serena, Adrian barked, noticing her standing alone. He beckoned her over with a snap of his fingers, as if calling a disobedient dog. Come here. Tell them about the visual effects. Tell them how hard we worked on the green screen sequences. Serena did not move. The noise of the party, the laughter, the clinking glasses, the thumping bass of the DJ, seemed to warp and distort, turning into a wall of static. Background noise. That was what she had called Liam. But looking at Adrian, looking at this glittering, hollow world she had fought so hard to enter, she realized that this was the static. This was the meaningless interference that prevented her from hearing anything true. Serena. Adrian's voice sharpened, an edge of warning creeping in. Do not be difficult. Get over here. Serena looked at him. She looked at the man she had destroyed her marriage for. She looked at the man who had promised her the stars and given her a flashlight. No, she said. The word was soft, barely audible over the music, but to Serena, it sounded like a cannon shot. Adrian blinked, his face twisting into a sneer. Excuse me? What did you say? I said no. Serena repeated, louder this time. She stepped forward, her heels clicking on the poolside tiles. I am not going to tell them about the green screens, Adrian. I am not going to tell them about the explosions. Because none of it matters. It is all fake. You are fake. I am fake. We are just noise. The circle of girls fell silent, sensing the blood in the water. Adrian's face turned a mottled shade of purple. He stepped toward her, lowering his voice to a venomous hiss. You are drunk, Serena. You are embarrassing yourself. You are embarrassing me. Go to the car. I am going to the car, Serena said, reaching up to her neck. She unclasped the diamond necklace he had gifted her for the press tour, a loan from a jeweler she did not know, and dropped it into his hand. It landed with a heavy, cold slap against his palm. But you are not coming with me. She turned and walked away. She did not look back as Adrian shouted her name, his voice cracking with impotent rage. She walked through the crowded party, pushing past producers and superstars, ignoring the flashbulbs that popped in her face like strobes. She walked out the front entrance, past the valet stand, and signaled for her own car. The vintage Porsche she had bought with her first big paycheck, the one thing she still owned that Adrian had not touched. She drove fast. She drove away from the hills, away from the lights, plunging down into the sprawling, gritty grid of the valley. She did not know where she was going until she saw the exit sign for Burbank. Her hands, gripping the leather steering wheel, steered the car of their own accord. They were guided by a muscle memory that predated the fame, a homing beacon that pointed toward the only place where she had ever felt safe. She pulled up to the industrial park at 3 a.m. The streetlights flickered, casting long, jumping shadows on the corrugated metal walls of the warehouses. It was a desolate, ugly place, miles away from the glamour of the Sunset Tower. But there, parked in front of Unit 4B, was a battered Toyota Camry. Serena parked her Porsche behind it. She turned off the engine. The silence of the industrial park was profound. It was not the manicured silence of the hills. It was the heavy, settled silence of a place where work is done. She got out of the car. The cool night air bit through the thin silk of her dress. She walked to the metal door of the studio. There was no doorbell. She raised her hand to knock, but hesitated. What was she doing? She was the most famous woman in America, shivering in an alleyway, about to beg a man she had humiliated to look at her again. Before she could knock, the heavy steel door groaned and swung open. Liam stood there. He had taken off his tuxedo jacket and unbuttoned his collar. He held a bag of takeout trash in one hand. He stopped when he saw her. He did not look surprised. He looked resigned, as if he had been expecting the ghosts of the past to eventually find their way to his doorstep. Behind him, in the warm, yellow light of the studio, Serena could see Maya Lin sitting on the leather couch, reading a book. The scene was so intimate, so simple, that it felt like a knife twisting in Serena's gut. "Go home, Serena," Liam said quietly. He did not invite her in. He blocked the doorway with his body, a guardian of the peace he had built. "I have no home," Serena whispered, her voice breaking. She took a step forward, the desperation rising in her throat like bile. "I left him, Liam. I left Adrian. I walked out. I am done with the noise. I want to listen. Please, just let me come in. Let me listen." Liam looked at her. He saw the shivering shoulders. He saw the ruined makeup. He saw the wreck of a woman who had collided with her own ambition. But he also felt the warmth of the room behind him, the safety of the world he had constructed with Maya, the music that was finally his own. "You had your chance to listen," Liam said, his voice sad but unyielding. "For 7 years, you had the front row seat, and you walked out of the theater." He stepped back, not to let her in, but to retreat. "The show is over, Serena." He began to pull the heavy door closed. "Liam, please," she cried out, reaching for the handle, her fingers scrabbling against the cold metal. "Do not shut me out. I am drowning. I am drowning in the silence." "Then learn to swim," Liam said. The door clicked shut. The deadbolt slid home with a sound of absolute finality. Serena stood alone in the dark alley. She pressed her forehead against the cold steel of the door. She could not hear anything from inside. The soundproofing was perfect. Liam had built a wall that not even her screams could penetrate. She slid down the door until she was sitting on the dirty concrete, her silver dress pooling around her like spilled mercury. Above her, the hum of the street lamp buzzed, a harsh, electric static that was the only company she had left. Here is the next chapter of the story, written in full, seamless prose as requested. The sun rose over Los Angeles with a cruel, unrelenting clarity, burning off the morning marine layer to reveal the smog and the scars of the city beneath. In a suite at the Chateau Marmont, Serena Blake woke up on top of the duvet, still wearing the silver dress that had cost more than her father's car. The silk was wrinkled, twisted around her legs like a shedding skin, and one of the straps had snapped, leaving a red welt across her shoulder. She did not move for a long time. She simply stared at the ceiling, listening to the distant hum of the housekeeper's vacuum in the hallway. Her head throbbed with the dull, rhythmic ache of a champagne hangover, but the pain in her chest was sharper, more precise. It was the physical sensation of loss. For years, she had believed that loss was a quiet thing, a fading away. She now realized that loss was loud. It was a deafness, a sudden absence of frequency that left her ears ringing. She rolled over and reached for her phone on the nightstand. The screen was a chaotic tapestry of notifications. Missed calls from her publicist. Missed calls from her agent. A dozen text messages from Adrian Steele, ranging from abusive to pleading. She ignored them all and opened the news feed. The headline was everywhere. It had mutated from an industry rumor into a full-blown cultural autopsy. The Sound of Heartbreak, Oscar winner L.C., revealed as Serena Blake's ex-husband. Serena scrolled through the article, her vision blurring. The internet sleuths had done their work. They had dug up old marriage certificates, obscure photos from her early red carpet appearances where Liam stood awkwardly in the background, and even the public records of their divorce filing. The narrative had shifted overnight. Yesterday, she was the glamorous movie star supporting a mysterious genius. Today, she was the villain in the year's most compelling underdog story. She called him static, one commentator wrote, quoting a source close to the production, that Serena suspected was Adrian himself, trying to distance himself from the wreckage. Now he is the only thing anyone is listening to. Serena dropped the phone onto the carpet. She walked into the bathroom and turned on the shower, scrubbing her skin until it was raw, trying to wash away the feeling of the alleyway, the cold steel of the studio door, and the look in Liam's eyes. That look haunted her more than the headlines. It was not hatred. It was pity. He had looked at her the way one looks at a bird that has flown into a window, stunned, broken, and entirely responsible for its own injury. Across town, the atmosphere in the Burbank studio was quiet, but it was the quiet of a library, not a tomb. Liam Cole was packing. He was not packing much, just his favorite microphone, a few hard drives, and the golden Oscar statue, which he wrapped carefully in an old t-shirt. Maya Lin sat on the edge of the desk, swinging her legs, drinking tea from a chipped mug. She watched him with a soft, steady gaze. "You do not have to leave the studio, Liam. The lease is paid up for another 6 months." "I know," Liam said, zipping up his duffel bag. "But the air is stale in here, Maya. Too many ghosts. Too many echoes of who I used to be. I need to go somewhere where the silence is natural, not manufactured." "Oregon," Maya suggested, a smile playing on her lips. "I have a cabin near the coast. It rains a lot. The roof leaks. The piano is even more out of tune than this one." Liam looked at her. He thought about the rain. He thought about the sound of water hitting a tin roof, a sound he had tried to recreate synthetically 1,000 times, but had never quite captured. He thought about Maya, who listened to the world with the same intensity that he did, who did not ask him to be a star, but simply asked him to be present. "Oregon sounds loud," Liam said, smiling back. "I like it." He walked over to the piano, the instrument that had saved his life. He ran his fingers over the keys one last time, not playing a note, just acknowledging the wood and the wire. He was leaving it behind. It belonged to the room, to the pain that had birthed the symphony. He did not need to carry the instrument of his grief anymore. He had extracted the melody. The rest was just furniture. "Did she call?" Maya asked gently. "No," Liam said. "And she will not." "Not really. Serena does not know how to talk to people who cannot do anything for her. She is probably talking to her publicist right now, figuring out how to spin this into a redemption arc. Do you hate her?" Liam paused. He looked out the high window at the slice of blue sky. "I used to. I hated her for making me feel small. I hated her for making me believe that my quietness was a defect. But last night, when I saw her in that alley, I just felt tired. She is trapping herself in a cage of her own making, Maya. She is screaming for attention, but she has forgotten how to speak." He picked up his bag. "I do not hate her. I just do not hear her anymore." Back at the Chateau Marmont, Serena was indeed trying to spin the narrative, but the centrifugal force of the truth was tearing her apart. Her publicist, a woman named Karen who spoke in bullet points, was pacing the hotel room. "Okay, here is the strategy," Karen said, clapping her hands. "We issue a statement. We say you are incredibly proud of your ex-husband. We say that the divorce was amicable, a mutual decision to pursue different artistic paths. We say that you always believed in his talent and that you are thrilled the world finally sees what you saw years ago." Serena sat on the edge of the bed, wrapped in a plush hotel robe. "It is a lie," she said, her voice hollow. "It is a press release, Serena," Karen snapped. "Nobody cares if it is true. They care if it is plausible. We need to kill the bitter ex-wife narrative before it affects the box office for Titan's fall. Adrian is already throwing you under the bus." He gave a quote to Variety saying he had no idea about your connection to the composer. "He knew," Serena whispered. "He knew everything." "It does not matter," Karen yelled, losing her professional veneer. "You are bleeding out, Serena. The internet is laughing at you. They are saying you traded a Mozart for a Michael Bay wannabe. You need to take control of the story." Serena stood up. She walked to the window and looked out at the billboard on Sunset Boulevard. It was a massive advertisement for Titan's fall. Her face was 50 feet high, airbrushed to perfection, looking fierce and determined, holding a gun against a backdrop of explosions. It looked nothing like her. It looked like a cartoon character. "I cannot do it," Serena said. "You cannot do what?" "I cannot say I am proud of him." Serena turned to face Karen. "Because if I say I am proud of him, I have to admit that I knew he was a genius all along. And if I knew he was a genius, then I am not just a victim of a bad marriage. I am a monster who tried to crush him because I was jealous." Karen stared at her, her mouth slightly open. "Serena, honey, this is Hollywood. We are all monsters. We just have better lighting. Serena laughed. It was a dry, brittle sound that hurt her throat. She walked over to the table where her purse lay. She pulled out her sunglasses. I am not signing the statement, Karen. Then what are you going to do? Karen demanded. Hide. No, Serena said. I am going to go listen. She did not explain what she meant. She simply walked out of the hotel room, leaving her publicist shouting at the closing door. She took the elevator down to the garage, got into her Porsche, and drove. She did not drive to the studio this time. That door was closed. She drove to the coast, heading north on the Pacific Coast Highway, driving until the radio signal faded into static and the only sound was the wind rushing past the window. She pulled over at a cliffside overlook in Malibu. She got out of the car and walked to the edge, looking down at the waves crashing against the rocks. The sound was immense, chaotic, and unrelenting. It was the sound of the world before humans, before cameras, before awards. She closed her eyes. She tried to hear the melody Liam had written. She tried to find the thread of the piano in the roar of the ocean, but she could not hear it. Her mind was too loud. The voice of Adrian, the voice of Karen, the voice of the internet, they were all screaming in her head. She realized then that Liam was right. He had learned to swim in the silence. She was still drowning in the noise. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. She looked at the screen one last time. A new email from Adrian popped up. Subject: You are ruining me. Serena drew her arm back and threw the phone. It sailed through the air, a tiny, glittering rectangle of technology, arcing out over the Pacific Ocean before disappearing into the white foam of the waves. It did not make a splash. Or if it did, the ocean was too loud for her to hear it. She stood there for a long time, shivering in the sea breeze. She was cut off. No agent. No husband. No ex-husband. No narrative. For the first time in 10 years, she was completely offline. It was terrifying. But as she stood there, forcing herself to breathe in time with the waves, she heard something else. A seagull crying out. The sound of tires on the pavement behind her. The sound of her own heartbeat, fast and irregular. It was not a symphony. It was not a masterpiece. It was just life. And for the first time, Serena Blake stopped trying to direct it. She just let it happen. The rain in Oregon did not hiss like the tires on the wet pavement of Los Angeles. It drummed. It was a rhythmic, percussive hammering against the cedar shake roof of the cabin, a sound that was ancient and indifferent to human ambition. Liam Cole sat on the floor of the living room, a braided rug beneath him, surrounded by a tangle of XLR cables and microphones. The fireplace crackled, the dry wood popping in conversation with the storm outside. It had been 1 year since the Academy Awards. 1 year since the gold statue was placed on the mantelpiece, where it now sat gathering a fine layer of dust, flanked by a jar of sea glass and a pinecone Maya had found on a hike. To the world, LC remained an enigma, a reclusive genius who had delivered one masterpiece and then vanished into the mist of the Pacific Northwest. There were no follow-up albums, no sold-out tours, no interviews in glossy magazines. There was only the work. Maya Lin walked into the room, shaking rainwater from her yellow coat. She carried a basket of firewood, her cheeks flushed with the cold. She looked at Liam, who was adjusting the gain on a field recorder, his eyes closed in deep concentration. Are you getting it? She asked softly, placing the wood by the hearth. I think so, Liam replied, opening his eyes. They were clear, the haunted shadows of Burbank replaced by the steady calm of a man who sleeps through the night. The wind is hitting the north face of the cliff. It creates a low frequency, almost like a cello. If I slow it down, it sounds like breathing. Maya smiled, sitting down beside him. She leaned her head on his shoulder. You find music in everything now, even the bad weather. Especially the bad weather, Liam corrected her. The sun is too loud. It wants you to look at it. The rain just wants you to listen. He looked at the Oscar on the mantel. Occasionally, a beam of firelight would catch the gold plating, making it flare. A year ago, that statue had felt like a weapon, a vindication of his existence against the woman who had erased him. Now, it was just an object. It was a souvenir from a trip to a country he no longer visited. He did not hate Serena Blake anymore. Hate required energy. Hate required a connection. He had simply let go of the rope. 1,000 miles south, the sun was indeed loud. It beat down on the concrete sprawling grid of the San Fernando Valley, bleaching the color from the billboards. Serena Blake stood in the produce aisle of a generic grocery store in Tarzana, holding a mesh bag of lemons. She was wearing oversized sunglasses and a baseball cap pulled low, but not to hide from paparazzi. There were no paparazzi. The flashing bulbs had stopped flashing about 6 months ago. After she threw her phone into the ocean, after she fired her publicist, and after she refused to do the press tour for Titan's Fall, the industry had done what it always does to things that stop generating revenue. It discarded her. Titan's Fall had been a box office disappointment, criticized for its lack of soul, a criticism that Serena read with a dark, private sense of irony. Adrian Steele had blamed her publicly, calling her unstable and difficult, before moving on to a 22-year-old model who had never heard of method acting. Serena placed the lemons in her basket. She looked at her hands. The nails were short, unpolished. She was teaching an acting class 3 days a week at a community center in North Hollywood. Her students were not future stars. They were dentists, retirees, and shy teenagers trying to find their voices. They did not care about her IMDb page. They cared that she listened to them. She walked to the checkout counter. The cashier, a young man with a nose ring, scanned her items with mechanical indifference. He did not recognize her. A year ago, this anonymity would have felt like death. It would have felt like the gray noise she had so despised in Liam. Now it felt like oxygen. As she waited to pay, a song came on the store's overhead radio. It was a tinny, compressed version of a pop ballad, processed and auto-tuned to perfection. But underneath the synthesizer, there was a piano line. It was simple, melancholic, and jarringly real. Serena froze. It was not Liam's music. It was a copycat. The LC effect had rippled through the music industry, inspiring a wave of stripped-back, emotional compositions. Everyone wanted to sound broken now. Everyone wanted to sound real. She paid for her groceries and walked out into the blinding parking lot. She sat in her car, a sensible sedan she had traded the Porsche for, and gripped the steering wheel. She thought about the night at the Dolby Theater. She thought about the look in Liam's eyes when he walked past her. "I am content." That was what he had said. Not happy. Content. Happiness was a spike, a high note that could not be sustained. Contentment was a bass line, steady, grounding, enduring. She reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a CD. It was the original soundtrack to Glass Houses. She had bought it at a record store, refusing to stream it. She wanted to hold the physical proof of his genius. She put the disc into the player. The first track, The Divorce, began to play. The out-of-tune, upright piano filled the small car. For months, she had not been able to listen to it without weeping, without drowning in a swamp of regret. She had replayed their marriage in her head, analyzing every moment she had dismissed him, every time she had chosen the spotlight over the candlelight. But today, the music sounded different. She heard the pain, yes, but underneath the pain, she heard the release. She heard a man exhaling. She realized that the song was not an accusation. It was a goodbye letter. And by listening to it, really listening to it, she was finally accepting the resignation. Serena turned off the engine. She rolled down the windows. The noise of the parking lot, car alarms, distant sirens, shouting children, drifted in. It was ugly, chaotic noise. But it was real. "Okay," she whispered to the empty car. She did not know what came next. There was no script. There was no director telling her where to stand. She was 35 years old, divorced, and fading from public memory. She was nobody. And for the first time in her life, she was someone she could stand to be alone with. Back in Oregon, the storm was breaking. The heavy drumming of the rain slowed to a gentle patter, and the clouds parted enough to let a shaft of pale, watery sunlight touch the ocean. Liam stepped out onto the porch of the cabin. The air smelled of wet pine needles and salt. He held a mug of coffee in his hand, the steam rising in curling ribbons. Maya came out and stood beside him, slipping her arm around his waist. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, resting her chin on his shoulder. Liam looked at the horizon, where the gray water met the gray sky. He listened. He could hear the waves crashing against the rocks below. He could hear the wind rustling the Douglas firs. He could hear the distant cry of a hawk. He tried to find the static, the anxiety, the need to prove himself, the echo of Serena's voice calling him a failure. He searched for it in the corners of his mind. It was gone. "I am thinking about the next track," Liam said quietly. "Does it have a name?" Liam took a sip of coffee. He watched a drop of rain fall from the eaves of the roof and land on the railing. It shattered into a dozen tiny diamonds, beautiful and temporary. "Yes," Liam said. "I think I will call it Resonance." He turned to Maya, and he smiled. It was not a smile for a camera. It was not a smile for an audience. It was a smile for the woman standing next to him, and for the man he had finally allowed himself to become. "Come on," he said, opening the door. "Let us go make some noise." They walked back inside, leaving the door slightly ajar. The sound of the piano began to drift out into the cool afternoon air, weaving itself into the wind, adding one more layer to the endless, beautiful symphony of the world. The static had cleared. The signal was strong, and the recording was finally perfect.